Feel this like your ear,
I swing over here, so I'll be over
I do the same. Yeah, I'm further. You might not get the wish. That's funny.
It hasn't happened yet. Blood sugar is pretty good. Yeah, one added cost.
Yeah, I went to the beach.
One question.
Oh, no, I wouldn't be thinking of it until like spring, summer of next year. That's kind of oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
read about it. It was.
I am positive about that. I'm positive about that. Yeah. I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. But yeah, no, not coming back.
What's that?
I believe it. No, I do believe it. Best basketball state.
No, and I also would never expect you to do it as a. Yeah, but it would be, and I'd understand like the requirements of it being
And that's great lifestyle. I didn't get to see much of them. My trips are short too, so
okay, sounds good.
one of the,
I feel bad for you. This is right now. That's an awesome name.
thank you.
Because you did one of the all-time rated names in my life. I mean, spells basketball. He spelled it, yes.
Yeah, that's
No, I'm scratching. Just marriage.
yeah.
Yeah, that all sounds really good. Okay. Yeah.
No, you just gotta put
I
70.
will get back to you. All right, cool.
I'll watch them do that.
Hey, Billy Boy, quick question before we get started.
Yeah.
Of the lawsuit.
I have my idea. You guys need me? Come on. Yes, indeed.
You can act, you can tell them that way.
I'm sitting right now, so just read it. You got it.
I know, can you imagine that?
If we get lucky, I'll just do it on Friday.
Let the sun drive. My wife and son was driving down there. Oh, wow.
Things like where they have a friend of mine's starting in Chicago, like ice stand there, so I guess they figure they're going to show up and they entertain it for 2 days or
We had a couple really good ones.
Learn how to tweet angry tweets. Learn how to tweet and spell words. Capital V. This one, it's really just a drop off. This guy is a drop off time. And I think pretty much I drink some
He was the
Sorry, just fine, as long as.
And it took like 3 hours to visit.
Well, I couldn't not go and then finally we did this.
18 years ago.
All right. Whatever the time went. Mine's one kindergarten, and the other 2 years old. Every day when one of them wakes me up, because every day they wake up and I want to tip to the room and say, but I make a mistake, look at my phone, and I see all the like, well, I mean, it's just unhooked my whole lifestyle. Lying on the floor, that's like my kids, but it's just negative. Uplift, American appeal. Listen to mama, yeah, you like
Picturing one of these things, maybe.
Oh, really? Okay.
So we're like just waxing.
Okay, yes.
I'm trying to get that going here. Failing. That's after. Thoughts on this? Use the effort. You can have to read an email. You're talking about the international journals. Exactly. Yes.
Are you serious? That's like my favorite thing I've seen in like oh, that's so
Oh, fashionably late. What's going on? I think I really missed one.
good, are you? Show you my new favorite thing of the day.
That's really good. That's great.
Hat tip, Steve.
So what's on this? What's the subject? Andrew numbers. Yeah. I thought we were going to be over this. We had a couple of hours.
Not that.
Some will have low vision response.
It really is.
Same joke every day.
And then when more than one of you start doing it, it really is.
Sorry, it's an accident.
Yeah, right. It is a pattern. Yep. December 2021.
Yeah, you being a cat first. You don't like the sound of the shooter.
You like the sound of the first speak.
Now in the oval, and it's not quiet, but I think it's a lot more quiet. That's what we kind of rule amongst ourselves.
That's a good rule.
Some people don't fall, but all the regulars do.
To the left.
John Bannon.
Oh, wow. Wow. Poor people carrying. Yeah, this Trump yeah, I know.
Good afternoon. The images from the Honorable Carry ceremony at Joint Base Pearl Harbor this month made us all proud to be Americans. President Trump is committed to getting the almost 8,000 left behind from the Korean War home and Good afternoon. The images from the Honorable Carry ceremony at Joint Base Pearl Harbor this month made us all proud to be Americans. President Trump is committed to getting the almost 8,000 left behind from the Korean War home and bringing closure to the families who have been waiting for more than 60 years. The process of identifying and verifying the remains is challenging, but one that this administration is committed to. Overseeing this process is Kelly McKeag, the Director of Defense for POW and MIA Accounting Agency, leading DoD's worldwide operation of research, investigation, recovery, and identification, and supporting functions. Director McKeag strives to provide the fullest possible accounting of our missing personnel. The director, along with his colleagues, Dr. John Bird, the Defense POW and MIA Accounting Agency Laboratory Director, and Dr. Timothy McMahon, Director of DoD DNA Operations, have joined us today to offer remarks and take your questions on this topic. After this, I'll be back up to address other questions and news of the day. Thanks, Director.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The August 1st repatriation and homecoming in Hawaii of the remains of the Korean War unaccounted for was a poignant manifestation of the commitment secured by President Trump and pledged by Chairman Kim at the Singapore summit. For the families of the 7,700 still unaccounted for from the Korean War, this first step in fulfilling this commitment has undoubtedly provided a seed of hope. Last week, over 700 of these family members gathered in Arlington, Virginia, to receive government updates, and they were resoundingly appreciative of the successful advocacy of the president and his administration. Two of those family members who attended, Charles and Larry McDaniel, were the recipients of the dog tag their father, Master Sergeant Charles McDaniel of Indiana. It was a sole personal effect returned by the North Koreans. The remains of those 55 cases are well into the painstaking, multifaceted analyses by Dr. John Bird and his forensic science team in Hawaii, and in the coming weeks, Dr. Tim McMahon and his dedicated DNA specialists in Delaware will begin their meticulous testing. The mettle of our scientists and the capabilities of our labs will be challenged, but in the months and years ahead, they will make identifications from these remains and give families long-sought answers. We are guardedly optimistic the 1 August repatriation is the first tangible action of others with which we will be able to account for more of our missing from the Korean War. The second aspect of the Singapore commitment was the recovery of remains in North Korea, which DPRK officials reaffirmed last month. We are in the midst of exploring next steps as well as discussions with the Korean People's Army for the express purpose of resuming joint field operations and having additional repatriations. But our mission to search for, find, and account for missing Department of Defense personnel from World War II through Operation Iraqi Freedom is one not limited to the Korean Peninsula. Today, 186 personnel from DPA and private partners are deployed in 7 nations, and yesterday, 50 of those members returned from Laos and the Philippines. Our global mission is humanitarian in every respect, because the impact of a missing American to their family is not constrained by time or generations, and it leaves an enduring pain and void. This is why former enemies like Vietnam used cooperation on the POW-MIA mission as a bridge to normalization and today's thriving bilateral relationship with the United States. The fact that the United States of America vigorously pursues the fullest possible accounting of our missing reflects our values as a nation. This sacred obligation, if not moral imperative, remains a high priority for the Department of Defense. Inherent to the exceptional teamwork, resources, and resoluteness provided by multiple agencies is a solemn vow that those who were sent off in harm's way and are missing will not be forgotten, and their families will receive answers to their decades of uncertainty. My colleagues and I welcome your questions.
Gentlemen, I was with President Clinton in 2000 when he went to a place in Vietnam, north of Hanoi, where one of these recovery efforts were underway. So I have some familiarity with this. Even there, when things are discovered, it takes a long time to establish the trail forensically. I'd like to ask you both, what condition are the remains or the parts of remains you've received so far, and how challenging will the forensic work be ahead? Are you a long, long way, or was what you received something that gets you close to identifying and confirming?
We would characterize the preservation of the remains as moderate to poor as a general consideration. However, what our lab specializes in is making identifications in circumstances where you have very little to work with. And so I'm confident that we're going to do well with the remains in these 55 boxes over the coming months and maybe the next several years. When you look at what's at stake, we're going to be doing a lot of DNA sampling. And that's what Dr. McMahon's lab does, is they process the samples and then they go into a mass database where they can be compared to all of the other samples that we've generated from remains from North Korea, and also compared to the family members. And so it takes some time to get the samples processed through the lab at AFMES. It takes some time to get them into the mass comparison, but once they're in there, we'll start looking for the quick identifications that can be made where you have compelling matches that show themselves early on. We also look for comparisons to dental records that can be distinctive. We look for individuals that are unusual in the sense of being very tall, very short, very old. Anything that distinguishes somebody, we can usually get a good clue and identify them faster. But because of the preservation of the remains, that will just sort of guide the kinds of methods that we can bring to bear on the case. And the case will be very DNA intensive in terms of the way that we're going to go about this.
And the number 55, is that, what does that number represent? And
It's
is
the
that
number of
55
boxes.
individuals?
No, it's the number of boxes that the remains came in. And at no time did we expect there to be one body, one box, nor did the North Koreans try to pitch it that way to us when we were in Wonsan.
John?
Mr. Director, thank you. What type of certainty do you have that the remains that the North Koreans had handed over to the Americans are that of missing Americans as opposed to other nationalities that fought alongside the Americans during the Korean War?
We have a high confidence. So in the early 90s, for 5 years, the North Koreans would repatriate unilaterally remains that they had recovered. Out of those 208 boxes over those 5 years, we estimated, after DNA sampling, 400 individuals. Now, from that, 200 were Americans. So the likelihood is, you're correct, there may be some of UN sending forces, there may be some South Korean soldiers' remains, as well as Chinese and North Korean. But our laboratories, both DNA and the forensic laboratory, have the technology and the capabilities by which to differentiate those remains over the course of the next several years.
Director, I think you mentioned you're in some discussions with the North Koreans about potential future actions, maybe to search for more remains and joint efforts as such. I think the Pentagon and Secretary Mattis have mentioned that. What, if I'm to understand right, the Bush administration ended the program in which U.S. officials would be helping search for the remains, in part because of security concerns for our own forces there. Can you describe kind of what you're looking for from the North that could resume those kind of joint operations, and what steps you need and how close you are to maybe doing that?
So for 10 years, we operated between 1996 and 2005. Over time, conducting 33 joint activities with the North Koreans. Security is primarily our responsibility for our personnel. We also pay attention to communications, having communications abilities, as well as having an ability to medevac our personnel should they get hurt. What we would be looking for from the North Koreans is, again, a commitment from them that communications, medical evacuation requirements can be met, and more importantly, that we can conduct these joint operations in a collaborative way, as we had done for 10 years. It all comes down back into 2005 to their behavior on the international stage. The president, rightfully so, was concerned that their nuclear activities, their missile activities, were countermanding and counterproductive to our joint operations, which is why we suspended.
Is it more the tone and the bigger geopolitical talks that are going on, or is it specifics about being in the field that you're really looking at right now?
Both. So Secretary Pompeo, in getting a reaffirmation from the North Koreans last month, affirmed that they do want to establish communications with us and to conduct joint operations. We have not started those negotiations. We will do so. It is on a separate track. However, as you well pointed out, it could be drawn into the greater geopolitical stream. But for now, we're treating it as a military-to-military contact, but more importantly, as a humanitarian endeavor that's separate and distinct from anything else. And by the way, the 45 countries that we work with all rightfully recognize this as a humanitarian endeavor, including countries like Russia and China, where we have tremendous cooperation with them.
John?
Thank you, Sarah. Gentlemen, the recent death of former Congressman Bill Hendon of North Carolina brought back a lot of the rehashing of serious charges he made that those who were in Vietnam, either as prisoners or dead, were not fully accounted for. Has the book finally been closed on those Americans who served in Vietnam and were prisoners of war?
It has. So right now there are close to 1,600 that remain missing and unaccounted for. Within that set of unaccounted for is what we call last known alive. It's a small subset of individuals who, for whatever reason, were seen alive at a certain point during the war and remained unaccounted for. Our priority with the Vietnamese is to get at that subset, small subset. I think it's down to 25, not necessarily prisoners of war, but again, last known alive at the time that they were seen.
Take one last question, Brian.
Real quick, of the remains in the 55 boxes, can we confirm for a fact that all of them are human remains, or are we still questioning that?
Yes, we did a cursory inspection of the remains in Wonsan before we loaded them onto our military aircraft, just to ensure that at least some of what was in each box was human. When we got to Osan in South Korea, we spent 2 days going through every box in detail, conducting what we call a field forensic review. Purpose of that review is to ensure that every item is consistent with being human, and if there were any animal remains, we would have culled them out at that point. As it was, we did not find any animal remains.
Follow-up. Do we have any idea how many people that we're looking at yet?
No, we don't. There is a scientific process to estimate that, and I wish it were very fast, because I think a lot of people would really like to know. The families would love to know that information, but unfortunately, it's going to take months of analysis to start to get a refined estimate.
Thank you.
Sorry, just one last question.
Sarah, thank you. Do you have a timeline for bringing back more remains? And can you characterize what it has been like to work with the North Koreans on this particular part of this process? Have they been working with you in good faith at every step of the way?
Okay, so the first question is, as Mr. McKeag mentioned, we're in the process of planning next steps, so we can't say we have any timeline today for bringing back more remains. We're hopeful that we will be in the not too distant future. I will say, though, in terms of having worked there, I worked there in the past during the 1996 to 2005 years. I spent a lot of time in the field there. And then I went into Wonsan with our team on July 27th, and there was a very different feel to it this time. It was a much more friendly, welcoming, and collegial approach this time compared to the way it used to be. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Looking ahead to next week, Ambassador Bolton will meet with officials in Israel and Ukraine, as well as with his Russian counterpart in Geneva, as a follow-up to the Helsinki summit to discuss a range of important national security issues. Lastly, we extend our prayers to the families of those injured and deceased after the tragic bridge collapse in Genoa, Italy, as well as to the victims of this morning's attack in London. The President condemns this horrible attack on innocent civilians and stands ready to provide assistance to the United Kingdom. And with that, I'll take your questions. Jonathan?
Sarah, we've heard from the President via Twitter on Omarosa, describing her as crazed, a crying lowlife, a dog. Is this any way for a president to talk about any American, let alone somebody that he hired and made the highest ranking African-American woman that served in his White House?
I think the president is certainly voicing his frustration with the fact that this person has shown a complete lack of integrity, particularly by the actions following her time here at the White House.
Why did he hire her? I mean, why did he hire somebody he's describing as a dog, as a
Look, the
lowlife?
president wanted to give her a chance, and he made clear when General Kelly came on, and he voiced concerns that this individual didn't have the best interest of the White House and the president and the country at heart. The president said, do what you can to get along, and if you can't, he gave him full authority to carry out the decision to let her go. Steve?
What is his strategy in continuing to respond to the charges in this book? Why does he just ignore it?
Look, I think he's made, again, the frustrations, I think not only those of us here in the White House, but frankly, I think most of America would be happy to ignore it. Unfortunately, the individuals in this room continue to create a large platform for somebody they know not to have a lot of credibility, for someone they frankly refuse to give a platform to when they worked here at the White House. It wasn't until this individual started to negatively attack this president and this administration and try try to tear this entire place down, that she received the type of platform and rollout that she's getting. I think it would be great if every single person in this room and every single person in the administration never had to talk about this again, and we actually got to focus on the real policies and the real things that not matter just to people in this building, but certainly all Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, and everybody in between. I think that would be the best thing that we could certainly do for our country. Jill?
Thank you, Sarah. What do you say to critics who see his attacks on Omarosa as part of a pattern of insulting prominent African Americans? People he's taken criticized recently include John Lemon, Maxine Waters. He's claimed that football players protesting racial injustice don't know what they're protesting.
Look, the president, this has absolutely nothing to do with race and everything to do with the president calling out someone's lack of integrity. The idea that you would only point a few of the things that the president has said negative about people that are minorities. The fact is the president's an equal opportunity person that calls things like he sees it. He always fights fire with fire, and he certainly doesn't hold back on doing that across the board.
Have you signed an NDA?
I'm not going to get into the back and forth on who has signed an NDA here at the White House. I can tell you that it's common in a lot of places for employees to sign NDAs, including in government, particularly anyone with a security clearance.
Me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Unless there's another Annie back there, I don't know. John may be happy to go by Annie if that means he gets to take your question, but.
The president said he kept Omarosa on despite complaints from her colleagues because she was personally supportive of him and said nice
Sorry, I
things
can't
about
hear
him. He said he kept her on despite complaints about her behavior because she was personally supportive of him and said nice things about him. Is that true of any other officials that are working in this White House right now?
I'm not aware of that. Justin?
Since you don't want to talk about Omarosa, I have a bunch on Turkey that hopefully you'll let me get through.
A bunch. I don't know. We'll do our best.
Do you have a reaction to President Erdogan calling for a ban on U.S. electronics like iPhones? And would the president encourage a similar ban on Turkish products by Americans?
I certainly don't have a policy announcement on that front at this point.
Sort of the same vein, there was a report from our colleague at Reuters that the U.S. is warning Turkey of increased pressure. So I'm wondering if you have details on how that was conveyed, what additional steps might look like, and if the U.S. would take additional steps before the hearing for the detained American pastor on October 12th.
How the information from Turkey was received, or how the information from the United States to Turkey? Well, I can tell you that at the Turkish ambassador's request, as you know, Ambassador John Bolton met with the ambassador of Turkey yesterday here at the White House and continued to raise and point out the concerns that we have.
One last one. Did the president encourage Israel's government to released a Turkish citizen in July, and did that contribute to his frustration with Erdogan not releasing this American pastor?
Certainly the president has a great deal of frustration on the fact that Pastor Brunson has not been released, as well as the fact that other U.S. citizens and employees of diplomatic facilities have not been released, and we're going to continue to call on Turkey to do the right thing and release those individuals. Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. Does the president or this White House believe that it is a violation of Department of Justice protocol if the special counsel's investigation goes beyond September 1st?
I'm not going to say that we would say necessarily a specific violation, but I think we've been very clear that not only do we, but all of the American people want this to wrap up. John?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Two questions on Turkey. As the relationship between the president and President Erdogan grows peripherous, my question very simply is, are we going to see the restoration of the readouts on calls between the president and other world leaders? That was terminated on the day after President Erdogan's election, and although we know that the president made a congratulatory call to him, there's been no readout since. Is that going to be restored?
Certainly we'll continue to keep you all posted, not just on calls with Turkey, but other head of state calls as well, and provide readouts when we have them. Dave?
Thanks, Sarah. The Taliban in Afghanistan this week has been on a surprise offensive. They've killed about 100 Afghan security forces, a couple dozen civilians as far as we know. The president was visiting with the 10th Mountain Division yesterday at Fort Drum. They've served in Afghanistan. Does this new offensive, is he still committed to his strategy that he outlined a year ago for Afghanistan, or does this new offensive give him the idea that maybe a different approach might be needed?
Certainly no announcements or changes in policy from the president's rollout last August. Kristen.
Sarah, have you asked the president if he's ever used the N-word?
The president addressed that question directly via Twitter. I'd refer you back to him. I can certainly say I've never heard him use that term or anything similar.
Have you asked him directly, Sarah?
The president, I didn't have to because he addressed it to the American people all at one time.
Why haven't you asked him directly?
Again, the president answered that question directly on Twitter earlier today.
Can you stand at the podium and guarantee the American people they'll never hear Donald Trump utter the N-word on a recording in any context?
I can't guarantee anything, but I can tell you that the president addressed this question directly. I can tell you that I've never heard it. I can also tell you that if myself or the people that are in this building serving this country every single day, doing our very best to help people all across this country and make it better, if at any point we felt that the president was who some of his critics claim him to be, we certainly wouldn't be here. This is a president who is fighting for all Americans, who is putting policies in place that help all Americans, particularly African Americans. Just look at the economy alone. This president, since he took office in the year and a half that he's been here, has created 700,000 new jobs for African Americans. That's 700,000 African Americans that are working now that weren't working when this president took place. When President Obama left after 8 years in office, he had only created 195,000 jobs for African Americans. President Trump in his first year and a half has already tripled what President Obama did in 8 years. Not only did he do that for African Americans, but for Hispanics. 1.7 million more Hispanics are working now. This is a president who cares about all Americans, who is committed to helping them, and is putting policies in place that actually do that. Kevin. Sorry, Kristen, I'm going to go ahead to Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Just to be clear, you can't guarantee it.
Look, I haven't been in every single room. I can tell you the president has addressed this directly. He's addressed it directly to the American people, and I can tell you what the focus and the heart of the president is, and that's on helping all Americans. And certainly, this is somebody who has been in business for decades, and you're just now hearing some of these outrageous accusations after the fact. He's dealt with people all over the world. It wasn't until he became a candidate for president that you started to hear some of these salacious and ridiculous claims. And certainly, I think if you look at the actions that this president has taken, certainly the policies that he's enacted, you can see the heart of who he is, and you can see exactly what he has done and the type of president and person he is. Kevin?
Thank you, Sarah. Just a very quick one on something that Omarosa said today. She called the president unfit, mentally unfit for the office. As someone who worked with her, how surprised are you at the level of her animus toward this president and toward this White House, and if I could follow?
I'm certainly, I think like most people that worked with her, very disappointed that she would go to such a self-serving and somebody who blatantly cares more about herself than our country to make up some of these outrageous claims and accusations. Look, she worked here for a year and didn't have any of these things to say. In fact, everything she said was quite the opposite, and not just the year that she worked here, but the time that she spent on the campaign trail. And I think it's really sad what she's doing at this point.
If I could follow very quickly, I wanted to ask you, just very briefly, we read earlier this afternoon that the Trump campaign has made an arbitration action against Omarosa. And I'm just curious, and I know there's separate entities, but is it likely that the White House is considering pursuing something in the way of possible action toward Omarosa for violating any...
I certainly wouldn't be able to comment on any potential ongoing legal matter. Major.
Sarah, a moment ago you said one of the motives for Omarosa was to tear this entire place down. What do you mean by that? And do you have, or others here have, ongoing concerns that while she was here, she taped other conversations that could either be damaging to the reputation of this White House or revelatory of something you'd rather keep private?
I think the greatest concern we have is the lack of integrity that this individual has shown.
One other thing, Sarah, she played a tape recording of a conversation with the president. Do you have any doubt that that is an authentic conversation that she had with the president?
I don't.
Okay, then related to that, the president said he was unaware in that conversation. Was that a truthful representation of what he knew at the time, or was he just trying to make Omarosa feel better?
As I said moments ago, the president had a direct conversation with General Kelly, asked them to try to work things out. If it didn't, he gave General Kelly the full authority to make decisions about hiring and firing, including with respect to Omarosa.
Because he knew what had happened, and he knew he'd approved it.
On the timing, I think he knew that it was certainly a possibility, but as to the fact whether or not General Kelly had called the president, I don't think he had at that point. Steve?
Sarah, repeatedly we've heard the president declare that the so-called Islamic State terror group has been practically vanquished, especially in Iraq and Syria. Well, the Defense Department yesterday, the lead inspector general for Operation Inherent Resolve, in fact, says that their forces are estimated to be anywhere between 28,600 and 31,600 fighters, which would be about the number that they had at their peak. So has ISIS been practically vanquished?
Certainly we know that the caliphate has been practically destroyed. Certainly there are continue to be ISIS fighters, and that's why we continue to take all of those threats seriously and look for ways every single day to defeat them and protect American people and our allies. Mike?
Can I go back to the race question again? I get that you can cite statistics that might be positive statistics for policies that the president has done vis-a-vis African Americans and other minorities. What do you say to people who look at the pattern of comments that the president has made specifically about African Americans and feel like he is singling those folks out because of their race? Are they missing something? Are they deluding themselves? What do you say to them? Because there are lots of people out there who look at the pattern and say, yes, he says negative things about a lot of people, but there seems to be a particular pattern of singling out African Americans and commenting in particular about their intelligence or lack thereof and their looks.
I certainly don't think so. I think, as I said, the president has said similar things about a number of individuals, certainly that are not African American or any other minority. I can simply talk to you about the policies and the person that the president is. I think if, again, the person that a lot of his critics say he is, certainly wouldn't have been in business with him for decades. Certainly you wouldn't have had Bill and Hillary Clinton. They attended his wedding. A number of Democrats begged him for campaign contributions. I mean, if they were who he said he was, why did they have these relationships with him? I think it is very convenient that these accusations started once the president became someone running for office. He has shown time and time again through his actions, through his policies, that he wants to be a president for all Americans, that he wants to do everything he can to make America better, and not just for a certain group of people, but for everybody. I think that he has made a number of comments about plenty of people, and to try to single that out to one group is frankly silly, because I think if you did a comparison, he's probably got a lot more nasty things out there about some other people. I'm sorry?
Do you think that,
Look, the president is somebody who's always going to fight fire with fire. This is something that isn't new, and it's something the American people knew when they voted for him, and they overwhelmingly elected him to be the president of the United States. And since he took office, he has governed in a way that is helping all Americans. Frankly, if we want to look at who's creating divisions in the country, I think the media has done more to divide this country, certainly far more than this president ever has, by elevating people like the author of this book, by focusing on a sparsely attended rally instead of all of the policies that this administration and that this president are enacting that are helping people not just on the economy, but on school choice, on prison reform that's disproportionately affected African Americans and Hispanics. This is a president who is governing to help all Americans, and I think we'd all be better off if the media gave that just a little bit more attention. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. You expressed how you feel about Omarosa since the publication of this book. How was she viewed by fellow staff members here at the White House while she worked here? Did she pull her own weight? Was she viewed as untrustworthy? Did you trust her? I'm just trying to get a sense about whether your view of her has changed with the publication of this book?
Certainly, I've expressed some disappointment. I'm not going to get into a back and forth on personal feelings that I have with a former colleague. I think that the focus not only of my time here, but of this administration is looking forward and how we can actually implement policies that matter to the American people, not who like to in the building behind me. Brian?
Different topic, if we can. When, and then a follow-up. When the first time the Mueller investigation indicted some Russians, this administration sanctioned those Russians. The 12 that were recently indicted, the 12 Russian nationals, does this administration plan to also level sanctions against them?
I don't have any announcements on that front right now.
Quick follow-up. You said you would like everyone to stop talking about this particular subject, including the administration. So are you saying you would like the president to stop tweeting about Omarosa?
I think if the media continues to give it wall-to-wall coverage, the administration, in some cases, will be forced to respond. But I think it would be better off for all of us to walk away and focus on some things that matter. Raquel?
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. I want to ask a question about Secretary Max. He's in Brazil right now and visiting other countries in South America. And how much does his trip has to do with countering the growing presence of China in the region?
Certainly, we have a lot of shared values with the countries that he's visiting. We would always like to be the priority partner for those countries, and we hope that those relationships will continue to develop, and we'll keep you posted if he has any updates from the trip. Last question, Stephen.
Bearing in mind that the Trump campaign's announcement that it's pursuing arbitration of Omarosa necessitates attention and a major national focus. Can we talk, and can I ask you once more about the practice of signing people to non-disclosure agreements? Because let me ask you what it says about the expressions of loyalty or lack thereof for people who work behind that wall. Why do people need to be contractually obligated to forever after, in perpetuity, never say anything negative about the president, any member of his family, any product they should produce? Why is that necessary?
Look, again, it's common in a lot of
corporations to protect the corporate interests. What's the particular necessity
it's
for
also, despite contrary opinion, it's actually very normal, and every administration prior to the Trump administration has had NDAs particularly specific for anyone that had a security clearance. This White House is certainly no
keeping someone like Omarosa silent, because right now what the Trump campaign is doing is he's forcing her essentially to defend herself and potentially even pay damages. Why is that necessary?
That's a question you would have to ask the Trump campaign. It's certainly not a question that I could answer as somebody that's in an official government capacity. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.
Hey everyone, I'm Melissa Ash. Thank you so much for joining us here on Right Side Broadcasting Network and for tuning in to that press briefing with Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I'm going to break it down, go through some of the highlights that she said and some of the highlights that Director of Defense of the MIA Accounting Agency, Kelly McKeag, and his colleagues said as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's going to be a great time as we break down some of these issues. And as you can see in that little graphic over here in the corner, make sure to tune in to my live primary election results tonight in 4 different states: Connecticut, Vermont, Michigan, And one more. I want to make sure I get it right for you guys. I'm sorry, that's Minnesota, Connecticut, Wisconsin, and Vermont. So it's going to be very exciting. I was researching a little bit earlier, and I will get ready later tonight too before we go on. It's going to be a great time. Anyways, I hope you guys are having a great day. And if you have any questions, maybe just about the press conference or an issue you want me to look further into, you can ask them right here on YouTube. And you can also send them to me on Twitter at Alyssa RSBN, ALYSSA. You can see my name up in the corner, RSBN. And I will answer your questions. I have my Twitter up over here, so I will be able to see those throughout the broadcast. And like I said, hope you guys are all doing great on this wonderful Tuesday. We've had a lot of rain here in Alabama. It kind of stopped now, but there was a flash flood warning, and I know there was some flooding on the East Coast too. So hopefully you guys are able to stay out of that. So first, I'm going to break down what Kelly McKeag said and some of his colleagues. And he is the Director of Defense of the Prisoners of War and Missing in Action Accounting Agency. So they were talking about those boxes that were brought back from North Korea with remains of American heroes in them. And he said, we're going to be doing a lot of DNA sampling. And these are of those American heroes from the Korean War. And he said it takes time to get the samples processed. And he also said we look for comparisons to dental records just to kind of figure out, who people really were, whether they were short or tall, and just different characteristics. And then they were asked some questions by reporters. They said there were 400 individuals out of 208 boxes. 200 are Americans. And he said security is primary for our personnel and that they're looking for a commitment from the North Koreans to conduct joint operations in a collaborative way. And before I go into that, got a comment over on YouTube. Let's see, I want to make sure that I get your name right. Doc Idu said, is there a way to donate to RSBN where YouTube doesn't get any of the money and censor it? Yes, thank you for asking, Doc. You can actually donate on our website, rsbnetwork.com, and you can donate directly there through PayPal or Patreon, which is our monthly service. And let's see, I'll pull that up for you guys real quick just so you can see it since you asked. Okay. Kind of hard to see here, but up at the top, you can't quite see it, but there is a red bar, and you just click donate at the top. And you can see the different links here where you're able to donate on PayPal or with a credit or debit card. And you just enter the amount right there, your debit or credit card information, and you can of course log in if you have a PayPal account. And then you enter your billing address and your contact information. And you click donate. It's a blue button at the bottom, kind of cut off so you can't really see it, but and if you feel a little bit more invested with RSBN, you really like what you're seeing here, and you want to of course, see more and help us get to political rallies all around the country to see President Trump's rallies, you can click right here and give a monthly donation on patreon.com. And this is Patreon. It's Patreon with an E. It's kind of cut off right now, but if you go to our website, there's a button over here, Become a Patron, a red button, and you will be able to donate monthly to support us. And of course, if you are not comfortable donating online, we completely understand and respect that. And you can send a check to our address, to our P.O. Box 1550 Opelika Road, Suite 6, Box 344 in Auburn, Alabama 36830. And we are very thankful for each and every one of those donations. We're not able to do this without you guys, as you know. And so we're super thankful for all of your support. And I see your comment, I refuse your nonsense, over on YouTube, said, can RSBN get a reporter pass to ask questions on the daily briefings? I really wish at one point we were promised a seat by the Trump campaign in the White House press briefing room, but unfortunately it did not happen. But that would be so amazing to see in the future. Okay, so also Director McKeag talked about how Secretary Pompeo affirmed North Koreans wanted to have joint operations with the U.S., and he said that 45 countries we work with all recognize this as a humanitarian effort. And he said right now there are close to 1,600 that remain unaccounted for. And he said a reporter asked if all, and also a reporter asked if all were human remains in the 55 boxes, and just to make sure no animal remains were found. And McKeag and his colleagues confirmed that no animal remains were found. And another reporter asked how many people were being looked at, and McKeag and his colleagues said that was unknown. Also just got a $5 donation from Gregory Ash, my dad. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you. Really thankful for you, miss you, and hope you're having a great day. And also another reporter asked if the U.S. was in good favor with North Korea, and McKeag and his colleagues said yes. And thank you so much, I refuse, for your kind words there. Really appreciate that. And moving on to Sarah Sanders, of course, she was asked about a variety of topics. Omarosa, of course, the Mueller investigation, and Trump's tweets, of course. But she opened up by extending prayers to those in Italy that passed away from that bridge collapse early this morning, and I ask that you guys will keep those people in your prayers as well. The family members of those who passed away, that number is still going up, and they're trying to save people from all of the destruction. So please keep them in your prayers. And also, Sarah Sanders said that they were extending prayers to the terror attack in the UK, and that they were available, that the U.S. will be available to assist the UK in that. So, of course, the questions started out with Omarosa, and a reporter asked, why did President Trump hire Omarosa if he's describing her as a dog, which he did on Twitter this morning? And Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said he wanted to give her a chance and he can't ignore it, because the media blows it up. And she also said, it would be great if we could all focus on issues instead of this. And when she was asked repeatedly, and we'll get into more of those questions soon, if President Trump's attacks on Omarosa have anything to do with race, she said they don't have anything to do with race, but he's just calling out those who are not competent and that the president fights fire with fire. And now another reporter said the president said he kept Omarosa on because she was personally supportive of him, any other staff members hired because of this. And Sarah Sanders said not that she knows of. And another reporter said as the relationship with the president and the president of Turkey grows proliferous, will we see restoration of calls of the president and other world leaders? And Sarah Sanders said, we will keep you posted and provide readouts when we have them. And when asked more questions about President Trump and just, really who he's for and who he's not for, Sarah Sanders said, this is a president who cares about all Americans and who is putting policies in place to do it. And another reporter talked about how Omarosa called President Trump mentally unfit for office and asked Sarah Sanders if she was surprised by this claim. And Sarah Sanders said she was very disappointed that Omarosa would be so self-serving and think of herself and not our country. And she said that she thinks it's really sad what she's doing at this point. And a reporter talked about how the Trump campaign has made an arbitration action against Omarosa and asked Sarah Sanders about that. And she said that she cannot comment on an ongoing legal matter. And another reporter asked, do you think Omarosa taped other conversations while she was here? Sarah Sanders said she didn't know, but she was really disappointed by the lack of integrity in the former White House aide. And another reporter asked, what do you say to people who look at the pattern of comments the president has made to African Americans and are singling them out because of their race? And Sarah Sanders said, the president has said similar things about a number of individuals, no matter what their race. He has shown time and time again that he wants to be a people for all Americans. He has governed in a way that's helping all Americans. The media is divisive by elevating the author of this book instead of focusing on the issues that matter. And another reporter asked Sarah Sanders, what is your view of Omarosa? And Sarah Sanders said she's not going to get into personal feelings about a former employee. And another reporter asked, I think it was the last question, the 12 Russian nationals that were recently indicted, will sanctions be placed against them? And Sarah Sanders said that she cannot comment on this right now. So there were a variety of topics that were asked today. Of course, at times, the mainstream media and press started just talking over each other. It didn't get too crazy, though. I think they were calm for the most part, but it was also really interesting to kind of see a difference in the level of respect. They really were calm and respected Kelly McKeag and his colleagues, and of course, not so much with Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. So I'm going to check our Facebook comments over here, make sure there aren't any that I have missed. Vicky DeMata, surprisingly, they did not ask about Peter Strzok at the White House press briefing today. Okay, not too many more questions on Facebook, so I'm going to check Twitter as well. And remember, if you have any questions or issues that you want me to look into that were discussed today at that White House press briefing, please send them to me at Alyssa RSBN. And Josie C said, "Hi, Alyssa, when will the 20K indictments be shown?" Not sure about that yet, Josie. Thank you, Dink, for sharing me on Gab. My next report is tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on those primary election results. And I'm pulling up some information for you guys just in case you were not sure. Wanted to update you on the Omarosa Trump campaign situation. Okay, so this is from Deadline.com. And this was just about 3 hours ago. I'm going to share this with you guys. So Donald J. Trump for President Inc. has filed an arbitration against Omarosa Manigault-Newman with the American Arbitration Association in New York City for breach of her 2016 confidentiality agreement with the Trump campaign. And the legal move comes as Omarosa's book Unhinged book tour and accompanying release of secret tapes she made of Trump and various staffers was clearly getting under President Trump's skin. This morning, he described her as a dog, a crazed lowlife who he gave a break and a job at the White House. And he also tweeted while she's book touring that he knew she was wacky when he hired her to the White House. But he hired her anyway with a $179,000 a year salary because she said nice things about him. And a campaign representative told AP Omarosa's book Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House, and her book tour, March Across the TV News Landscape, Strewing Those Secret Recordings, breaches the 2016 confidentiality agreement she signed with the Trump campaign. And Omarosa, who White House Chief of Staff John Kelly fired last December, citing ethics violations, said on her book tour that she refused to sign a White House non-disclosure agreement. She claimed the White House offered recently her a $15,000 a month deal to keep her mouth shut. She turned down this deal, however, and acknowledged she signed an NDA during her work on Trump's 2016 campaign. And she has not yet issued any comment about the Trump campaign's legal move. An announcement of arbitration comes not long after Omarosa visited CBS This Morning and unveiled a tape of Trump campaign staffers Katrina Pearson and Lynn Patton talking to her about that rumored tape of President Trump using the N-word during an Apprentice shooting. And in the tape, a voice that sounds like Pearson is heard saying in response to Trump, "No, he said it. No, he said it. He's embarrassed." So since appearing on the Sunday Beltway show, Meet the Press, Omarosa has been claiming that after her book closed, she in fact heard an audio tape made during production of The Apprentice in which Trump used the N-word, and she boasted that it finally proved President Trump is racist because don't want to get into that anymore. But President Trump did tweet, and I shared this with you guys during my recap last night, at Mark Burnett. This is what he tweeted. At Mark Burnett called to say there are no tapes of The Apprentice where I use such a terrible and disgusting word as attributed by wacky and deranged Omarosa. Okay, so wanted to share that with you guys for a second. And right now I'm researching a little bit. Sorry about the silence, but bear with me about one of your questions. Orbit Corkra asking what's up with Turkey. Okay, so I have an update for you guys from CBS News I'm going to share with you. So as you know, Turkey is still holding American pastor Andrew Brunson and the U.S. actually placed sanctions on Turkey. But this is from just yesterday, actually. So Turkey rejects impositions as standoff with U.S. rattles markets. So Turkey's central bank announced a series of measures on Monday to free up cash for banks as the country grapples with the currency crisis sparked by concerns over President Erdogan's economic policies and a trade and diplomatic dispute with the United States. So the Turkish lira has nosedived over the past week and tumbled another 7% on Monday as the central bank's measures failed to restore investor confidence. So the dispute with the U.S. has centered on the continued detention of American pastor Andrew Brunson, who is on trial for espionage and terror-related charges. And the U.S. has responded by slapping financial sanctions on 2 ministers and later doubled steel and aluminum tariffs on Turkey, driving the concerns over Turkey's economy, which are rattling international financial markets. But Turkey's foreign minister said the U.S. wouldn't achieve its aims by exerting pressure and imposing sanctions. Addressing a conference in Ankara gathering Turkish ambassadors, Mevlut Cavusoglu called on the U.S. to remain loyal to ties based on traditional friendship and NATO alliance. And he said, "We support diplomacy and negotiations, but it is not possible for us to accept impositions." And Turkey's currency actually hit a record low of 7.23 per dollar late on Sunday after Erdogan, in a series of speeches over the week, showed no sign of backing down in the standoff against the United States. And there was also an online crackdown. Turkey's Interior Ministry said Monday that it would take legal action against hundreds of social media accounts that it said were provoking the drop in the lira's value. In the ministry, it had initiated legal investigations against 346 social media accounts which posted content provoking the dollar exchange rate. And multiple institutions announced Monday that similar warnings against those responsible for the crisis. Now, the Istanbul Public Prosecutor's Office announced it had begun investigating those who had taken actions which threaten economic stability. And the Capital Markets Board of Turkey issued a similar warning to those who spread lies, false, or misleading information, news, or analysis. And of course, financial markets reacted as well, with Asian stock prices sinking Monday as Turkey's financial turmoil fueled fears of contagion in other emerging markets. And on Wall Street, investors have responded to Turkey jitters by selling equities and buying government bonds. So the dollar strengthened as traders dumped Turkish lira. Major exporters, including technology, basic materials, and industrial companies, sank, and the Standard & Poor's 500 index slid 0.7% to 2,833.28, ending a 5-week winning streak. And the NASDAQ Composite broke an 8-day rising trend and sank 0.7% to 7,809.11. So investors question whether Erdogan's, I want to say it right, Erdogan's government can cope with the plunging currency, the diplomatic spat with Washington, and other problems. And Erdogan has accumulated more and more control over Turkey's financial system and central bank. So an analyst, Eugene Liao of the DBS Group, said in a report, Turkey's financial crisis has taken center stage, displacing trade wars as the immediate concern. And worries are building that this may lead to contagion across emerging markets. And Lau said, "We fail to see how the crisis can be resolved without external support. But an international monetary support package will be difficult given Turkey's current political situation." And of course, there were some calming measures as well. So Erdogan, thank you, Noah Larson. Erdogan last week ruled out the possibility of higher interest rates, which economists say are needed to stabilize the currency, and he threatened to seek new alliances and partners and warned of drastic measures if businesses withdraw foreign currencies from banks. And Simon Derrick, who is the chief currency strategist at BNY Mellon, said that in the absence of a decisive rate hike, it is hard to look at these announcements being anything more than temporary calming measures rather than solutions to the problems at hand. And the lira recovered some of its losses after Berat Albayrak, the country's finance chief and Erdogan's son-in-law, said late Sunday that the government had readied an action plan to ease market concerns without elaborating. And he also said the government had no plans to seize foreign currency deposits or convert deposits to the Turkish lira. And on Monday, the central bank announced in a statement a series of steps to provide all the liquidity the banks need. And the moves are meant to grease the financial system, ease any worries about trouble at banks, and keep them providing loans to people and businesses. And in times of high uncertainty, banks tend to shy away from lending to each other, which is a so-called credit crunch. A lack of daily liquidity can cause a bank to collapse. And the lira has dropped some 45% this year. And let's see, switching over, I want to see if you guys have any topics that were discussed during the White House press briefing today that you want me to talk about as we wrap this up. And I'm going to check over on Twitter as well to make sure you don't have any questions or comments. Okay, and I'm going to check Facebook too real quick. Alice over on Facebook wanted to hear the Omarosa tapes. I shared one of them with you guys yesterday. Let me see if I can find more real quick, and I will play them for you. And
Hey, Mom.
Where are you?
I'm in class right now, actually.
Are you spending all your time playing video games and partying?
No, I don't have the liver enzyme to process alcohol. I become like a red, sweaty mess.
Ronnie Chang, international student, now streaming.
You fully pumped? I'm moderately pumped.
There has been this recording released. Omarosa, she says, recorded a phone call with the president.
Okay, so this is when Omarosa was telling the president that she had just been fired with John Kelly, and he was unaware of it.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody.
Wow.
You know, they run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
So he definitely acted surprised. He said, "I don't love you leaving at all," which shows that, you know, he did like her working there. And it really looked like they had a good relationship until she was fired. And then later on, well, now the last few days, started coming out just saying horrible things about him and terrible things in her book as well, and just lying and using using all of that just as a way to sell her book, which is really disgusting. And the mainstream media has been focusing on her a little bit too much as well. And, we saw today during that White House press briefing, just many of the questions that were asked were about her. And so it was really good to see during the beginning of the White House press briefing, kind of more positive focus. All the reporters were really inquisitive and just excited to hear about the American heroes coming home from North Korea, their remains, and they will be buried, and their families will be able to come and visit them here in America. And so that definitely was a blessing. So I'm checking over here on YouTube, and I'm going to keep checking on Twitter and Facebook as well, just to make sure you guys don't have any more questions or topics you want me to talk about today as we wrap this up. And remember, if you do have anything you want me to talk about as we finish, you can message me at Alyssa RSBN on Twitter. You're good. You're good. Hey. Okay. Okay. EK, I see your comment. When will Dear President speak again to us? We do not have that released yet, but of course, if we have access, we will definitely be streaming that for you guys. So stay tuned. And I will tell, when he comes back, I'll tell Joe that you guys said hey to him. That is our CEO. And since it was discussed today during the White House press briefing, I want to elaborate a little bit more for you guys on the remains of the 55 U.S. soldiers that were returned home from North Korea after 65 years. And this is from the New York Times. And this is a little old, from a couple weeks ago. This is July 26. So remains believed to be those of 55 American servicemen were flown out of North Korea on Friday, the first visible result of President Trump's efforts to bring the American war dead home 65 years after the end of combat in the Korean War. And the White House said in announcing the handover, "We are encouraged by North Korea's actions and the momentum for positive change." And an American Air Force C-17 Globemaster cargo plane carrying the remains landed later at Osan Air Base, south of Seoul, the South Korean capital, and hundreds of American service members as well as military honor guard lined up on the tarmac to mark the return of the fallen troops. And as the honor guard and the troops stood at attention, 55 small coffins containing the remains were individually carried out of the plane by dress uniformed soldiers and loaded into 6 vans. And each of the boxes was wrapped with the United Nations flag, the flag that American troops fought under in the Korean War. And from Osan Air Base, the remains were then transferred to the Hawaii-based Defense Prisoner of War Missing in Action Accounting Agency, where painstaking forensic work is, as you guys heard, now being carried out to identify them. And remains that were returned in the past from North Korea were found to be mixed with those of unidentified individuals. And it says here even with animal bones, but it was confirmed today by Director McKeag that there were no animal bones there. So after the return of the remains, President Trump thanked Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader, who less than a year ago was threatening the U.S. with his nuclear button. And then on July 26, President Trump tweeted out, "The remains of American servicemen will soon be leaving North Korea and heading to the United States. After so many years, this will be a great moment for so many families. Thank you to Kim Jong-un." And the Korean War was halted with an armistice signed 65 years ago on Friday, but thousands of American troops killed in major battles in North Korea have not been returned because the war was never formally concluded with a peace treaty, and North Korea and the U.S. lacked diplomatic ties, which are now being rebuilt. So the remains flown out on Friday during that time were the first handed over since a joint effort by American military experts and North Korean workers between 1996 and 2005, and the group collected the remains of what were believed to have been 220 American soldiers. And I wanted to find some more details for you guys without repeating myself. So hold on. Okay, so some more information from the Washington Post. Okay, so former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, who has visited North Korea several times, said he saw the potential recovery as a positive first step, but he warned that Pyongyang could stall in delivering other remains and attempt to use the issue as a way to make money. And Richardson predicted they'll give a certain amount of remains for free right away, but then they'll say the next ones, we need to find them, locate them, restore them, and then they'll start charging and they'll milk us. And though the U.S. has a policy of refusing to pay for the remains, in the past it has agreed to provide some funding for expenses incurred by the North Koreans. And the Pentagon estimates that nearly 7,700 U.S. troops are unaccounted for from the war, and among them are 5,300 believed to have been killed north of the 38th parallel, which largely coincides with the boundary between North and South Korea. So the North Korean government is believed to have somewhere between 120 and 200 sets of U.S. military remains in its position and ready to deliver. And of course, this is a little dated back before they did deliver those remains. But there are thousands more still in the North Korean countryside, according to Mickey Bergman, who is vice president of the Richardson Center for Global Engagement that the former governor founded. And according to Bergman, some remains were buried by U.S. troops in cemeteries that were intended to be temporary until China's entry in the Korean War forced U.S. forces to withdraw farther south. And other remains are at sites where aircraft crashed or in unmarked graves. And one of the things that is so important for the American people to understand is that this is just the beginning, he said. This is going to take years. It's going to take interviews and site surveys and teams on the ground. And he said, my fear is that when we get these remains and once again say mission accomplished, and it's not. And after the remains were returned, the scientific testing will be needed to confirm they belong to American troops from the Korean War, which, as you guys saw today in the press briefing, is being done right now. And in the past, North Korea has been accused of deliberately including non-American bones, even animal bones, in a bid to fool U.S. authorities. And the remains were sent to Hawaii, where the Defense POW/MIA Accounting Agency runs a laboratory at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickman, and the identification process there could take years, according to U.S. officials, and it often includes a review of archival information that determines where certain U.S. troops were likely to have disappeared or been buried. And after the historic summit between the two leaders last month, President Trump and Kim Jong-un agreed to work together to recover U.S. remains left in North Korea and implement the immediate repatriation of those already identified. And only a few days after meeting with Kim Jong-un, President Trump portrayed the remains as something that had already happened. He told a campaign rally in Minnesota, "We got back our great fallen heroes, the remains." However, the U.S. military had moved caskets into the Korean Peninsula's joint security area in anticipation, but no remains had been sent back yet, and soon negotiations were dragging out longer than many had expected. And Van Jackson, a former Pentagon official who teaches at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, said of the prospective repatriation that it took this long to secure such low-hanging fruit is a bad sign that North Korea intends to lean on its traditional negotiating posture. And on July 12th, North Korean military officials left their U.S. counterparts waiting for hours at the joint security area before belatedly calling to request they reschedule their prearranged meeting. And only after this meeting and subsequent ones was a practical progress made. And one part of the holdup appeared to be North Korean requests for payment. And the last time North Korea's military returned likely remains of American troops was in 2005 amid escalating tensions with Pyongyang, when the U.S. halted a program that had been running since the 1990s. And in 2007, Richardson visited North Korea on a private mission that had the approval of the Bush administration, and Richardson returned with the remains of 6 service members. And the return of remains now would come after commercial satellite imagery appeared to show that North Korea had destroyed part of a satellite testing facility that was part of the country's missile development program. And President Trump told reporters in June that North Korea had agreed to destroy that facility, and that the United States appreciated the move. So I wanted to take a quick second just to thank all of our moderators here on the YouTube chat that have been here for a few hours during the White House press briefing and now my post show. Let's see, Barbara Braley, Guinevere. I saw Real Frank in Florida was here earlier. And thank you so much for answering everyone's questions and for keeping our chat room clean. Really, really appreciate you guys. And thank you so much to our website moderators as well that keep the chat going on our website, rsbnetwork.com, and that keep it clean and provide interaction, information, common sense. Glenn O. and Rackculp, thank you so much for all of your help. Really appreciate you guys. And I think that is going to wrap it up for now. Thank you so much, Josie C, for your kind comments. Definitely will look up that Bible verse. She mentioned Isaiah 54:17. Thank you so much. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. It has been such an honor and a pleasure. And I will see you all tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for those primaries. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you, Anglo Mick, for wishing me a happy belated birthday. I had a great one. But anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Really appreciate all of you and hope that you have a great afternoon. And I will see you tonight once again for Right Side Broadcasting Network. I'm Melissa Ash.